Just to do a little introduction, Interface are one of our sponsors for our annual Green Gown Awards. In 2018 and again in 2019, they are sponsoring the Outstanding Leadership Team of the Year category. So we'll be joined here by John Khoo, who you can see. He's a sustainability manager for Interface, and also Alex Ryan, who's the Director of Sustainability at the University of Gloucester, be telling us a bit about what they're doing. And then finally, we'll hear from Fiona, our Director of Operations at the EAUC, on a little bit of what we're doing in that space as well. I'm going to hand straight over to John.
Hi there, guys. Hopefully you're seeing my slide deck. If not, do let us know in the chat, and I'm sure Claire will be straight across to let me know. It's an absolute pleasure for Interface to work with the EAUC. We often see you guys as a group can really drive a lot of the change in sustainability through your institutions yourselves, but also through the students that come through your doors. I'm just here to start the discussion around how we respond to a climate emergency, to give a manufacturer's perspective. We're all aware of the issue that's at hand. I mean, some people might have caught the recent Attenborough documentary that was on and premiered earlier a few days ago. Equally, an interesting thing for us is the emergence of Extinction Rebellion, both in terms of how that's affecting your own students, but also as a manufacturer, our own employees, the architecture practices that we work with, often now members of Extinction Rebellion or working on steering groups, such as working with Architects Declare. I think Greta Thunberg is probably the figurehead of the global climate strike movement, and I think she makes a very good point in terms of highlighting that this is an issue that is urgent, and that whether you're an academic institution or whether you're a manufacturer, you need to be making a difference. Now for us, I'm going to talk to you from the perspective of someone that makes flooring. We make carpet tile, luxury vinyl tile and rubber flooring, and we're probably one of hundreds of suppliers that you guys have in relation to universities. But what I want to highlight here is that whatever you make, whatever your product, whatever your service, you can and must be making a difference when it comes to a climate emergency. And I want to share some trends that we see as a manufacturer and highlight how they might be affecting the education market too. In terms of our reputation in sustainability, we're ranked 4th in the GlobeScan Sustainability Corporate Leaders Survey. But again, we're a much smaller company than a Unilever or a Patagonia or a Natura, but we can make a difference. I think one of the interesting things I see about the people in Planet Green League, I'm sat here next to Alex, is the ability for institutions of many different sizes to have a huge amount of impact. And there's great work being done in the education sector. Now for us, we've been working on sustainability for 25 years, taking you back to 1994. Our founder, Ray Anderson, realised that carpet tiles were actually quite a dirty business. He realised the environmental impact that we had, and he set us on a mission called Mission Zero to have remove the negative impact that we'd have by 2020. His idea was to turn the negative impact of Interface into a positive, to show that business could make a difference. Now, in terms of what we've been able to do up to 2019, 88% of all the energy we use is from renewable sources. On electricity, that's 100%. Nearly 60% of everything we use materials-wise is from recycled or bio-based content. And when it comes to carbon and GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, we've reduced our emissions by 96%. So we've really been trying to show it is possible, whatever you make. And Ray had a great quote about this. He highlighted that, what is that business case for ending life on Earth? Whatever institution you are, whether you're creating flooring, whether you're a university, whether you're a large bank, if you're not working for the environment, you're not going to have a market to play with in the future. Now for us, our new mission is called Climate Take Back, which is to run our business in a way that reverses the effects of global warming. And what we call on other manufacturers to be thinking about having a similar goal, but equally educational establishments, whether higher education or further education, should be looking to do the same. How can you go from doing less bad to doing more good? A nice analogy that was made a few days ago was someone was saying that Greta Thunberg talks about how the house is on fire. Mitigating or reducing the fire just by half still means the house is on fire. So we have to find a way to reverse that. We have to think about the entirety. Now for us, part of that, working with a number of education establishments such as the University of Gloucestershire, is looking at our Take Back programme, taking responsibility as a manufacturer for our products at the end of life. We'll look to work with social enterprises to reuse them. We'll look to repurpose our flooring into equine flooring. We'll look to recycle. From an educational point of view, I think one of the interesting things is with the circular economy that it's a really tricky thing to do, and it involves many stakeholders. And I think when we work with universities on the take back of our products, we find some really interesting ways to talk to a multitude of different stakeholders and understand different barriers. And I think that's going to be key for us finding a solution on the take back of our products will be the education market. Equally, when we talk about energy recovery and waste energy at the bottom of that list, which is at the bottom of our hierarchy, it's universities that are doing a lot of work on pyrolysis, turning waste into fuel. There's some really exciting technical developments that might mean that waste energy might be a better option for what we can't recycle or reuse. Equally, another thing I'd like to discuss is the need to be political and take a stand, whether you're in your vice chancellor, you're a student, you're a professor, you're in facilities, or you're a CEO of a car tile company. This quotes from our current CEO. We found ourselves in a situation in California a couple of years ago where fellow manufacturers and the trade body for flooring recycling were trying to reduce or hold back the target for recycling and the use of recycled content. And for us, we felt that this wasn't right, that we needed to make a change. So we hired a lobbyist. We went and worked with the Governor Brown and the California kind of local government to fight for a higher recycling rate. And we had a law passed a couple of years ago. What I quite like is, for Jay, this meant taking a stand, probably making himself less popular in the flooring industry. But it also sensed that as a leader, he demonstrated a willingness to step up, go against the flow, and to make a difference. And for us, another thing is getting the right level of ambition. We're able to offer all of our floors as carbon neutral at the moment. We've done this by working with our suppliers and our processes to reduce our carbon footprint. And then for that final third or so, we do use carbon offsets. But this should be standard, not just in flooring, but in any interiors material at the moment. If you can make something carbon neutral, why are you not making it carbon neutral? Equally, projects such as our Networks programme, which takes discarded fishing nets and transforms them into yarn whilst providing environmental and livelihood benefits for communities in the Philippines, Indonesia and Cameroon, are a good example of unusual collaborations. So here we're working with our yarn supplier Aquafil, but also London Zoo. And we're thinking about more systemic ways to solve some of the world's problems. And again, talking to a lot of universities, looking at the projects that are coming out of a lot of business schools, this idea of systemic change as an answer to the climate emergency and bringing together unusual suspects to tackle global problems is something that I'm seeing as a trend. And we can discuss that later in the question and answers. Now, to round up, I always think it's interesting if Greta Thunberg was to have a discussion with Ray Anson. Now, Ray passed away in 2011, but where Greta's asking governments, business leaders to realise that we are in the midst of a climate emergency. Ray is a good example of someone who he didn't have a green MBA, he didn't have any sustainability education before 1994, but he was willing to listen. He was willing to listen to the challenge of youth, the challenge of science, and turn a business that was part of the problem into one that we hope is part of the solution. But equally, I think Ray Anson would also appreciate what Greta Thunberg's done in terms of, if we're going to drive change, we need to foster a willingness through students, through staff and employees, to challenge the status quo. We all need to be a little bit more Greta. We also need to be a little bit more David Attenborough in ourselves to make that difference. So it was a conversation that will never happen, but I think they would have got on pretty well. On that note, I'll bring my presentation to a close and invite Claire to make any comments that you wish, and then Alex, be ready when you guys are ready.
Hi, John. I think we'll probably just move straight on to Alex, just to talk about what the University of Gloucester are doing in that space.
Thank you. So first of all, from University of Gloucestershire, a big thanks for being invited into such esteemed company by our colleagues at Interface, because we always feel like we're at the feet of the gurus when we're working with you. We adore working with you, but we just feel delighted to be able to, particularly when we come to this topic of carbon. I'm going to say just a couple of things about what we're doing at University of Gloucestershire. And we agreed, John and I, that we'd try and keep our trigger bit to 10 minutes each so that we could actually have a conversation with all of you about some of the issues at stake for universities in trying to actually take this agenda forwards. You know, for me, how I see our role here as to be just a really ordinary example of a university that is doing its best, but is at a crossroads and is really trying to understand how we can make the step change into the next space. John kind of alluded to the fact that we've got a bit of a reputation, particularly at the moment. We're fortunate and happy and delighted to be at the top of the Green League, which is still, you know, the current platform for understanding whether we're really walking our talk. And that's good. And we've got some nice bits of story to share on carbon, but we do not think that we are advanced in any stretch of the imagination. So what I wanted to try and be today is just someone who is showing you what the expected practice looks like, what ordinary carbon practice looks like up to this point, because we have yet to make the jump into the unexpected and the extraordinary. And we're at a moment of change in trying to understand how we're going to do that. So I'm going to just share like 2 slides quickly and show you what we're doing, what's behind what may seem like a really good profile, and hopefully just share what we're trying to do as a way forward, because that may resonate with some of you who are in the seminar with us. So as I mentioned, I mean, we've had the happy thing of being at the top of the People and Planet League this year. And if you look at our scorecard, which you can see on the screen, if you look at the carbon management score and the carbon reduction scores, oh my goodness, they're both 100%. How amazing. We must have it licked, right? No, not in the slightest. If you look over on the right-hand side, I mean, the way that we've actually managed to achieve this has been through really ordinary, expected things. We are by no means ahead of the sector in terms of what we've done. We've got a good sort of infrastructural and business planning and policy and EMS underpinning to what we do. We've done the low-hanging fruit things like boilers and LEDs and power down of PCs and all those sorts of things. We've actually achieved a lot of our carbon performance through having a pretty aggressive space management approach within the university, and we're multi-site and we've got historic stock. So we've got a lot of those hassles on us when we are trying to get through the headache of how do we improve the asset efficiency. Despite all of that, I mean, we've managed to get the 46% drop, which is a good overperformance against our original carbon plan target for scope 1 and 2, which was to get 40% by 2020. So we're happy about that. And then we've gone into a new carbon plan, which was started a couple of years ago, but is quickly become out of date, where we just set a carbon plan to try and maintain that level of performance through a period where we were doing some campus expansions, and also that we knew it was going to be the couple of very difficult years in the sector with demographic dip and fee cap changing and difficult times for recruitment, lean years for the sector, which we are now right in the heart of. And that carbon plan, yes, we've managed to keep that level of performance going, and we've had some good things done, like a very nice new building, which is zero carbon and so on. And we've managed to achieve our fossil fuel divestment. But again, this is all quite expected and normal now. There's nothing thrilling about what we've achieved. And now we need to be really looking at setting ambition differently. And that's a really mobile, changeable space. Our Vice-Chancellor has just met recently with ourselves and our student leaders who organised the recent climate action, which, you know, was very dramatic for where we're based in Cheltenham. And we haven't gone as far as to declare an emergency or anything. That's not very Cheltenham. It doesn't really particularly suit our personality. It was quite exciting for Cheltenham to have people out on the streets at all, with locals and local schools involved and so on. But the student energy around this has been a real game changer for us, and it's helping us to actually accelerate the conversation onto, right, we need to refresh carbon strategy now. Current strategy runs out 2020. We need one for 2030. And we've been asked to go and develop this now. But of course, we're going to be up against all these classic questions like everybody is about, well, obviously we don't want a massive offset component in there, that would not speak to that core of the XR and the Greta movement around tell the truth. You know, we want something that's authentic. We're known for being credible and authentic in this space. We also need to navigate the tricky question of scope 3. And again, in telling the truth, it's really, really hard for us. At the moment, we're just trying to look at seeing if we can get a proper level of ambition on scope 1 and 2. And I dare say some of my colleagues in the room may be in the same space. I mean, we were asked to have a little look around at trends and best practice for this webinar. And I can see that actually a quick skim around of what's going on around me shows that the approaches are currently as diverse as our institutions are. And, you know, with some people including scope 3, some people not, and a range of declarations, plans, commitments, different timeframes, etc. The interesting question for us in terms of how fast can we go is about how clever we can be and how strategic we can be about engaging our stakeholders, particularly the student energy, but also the staff energy and other key players in the university. And how can we actually bring people's awareness and insight up to speed rapidly on carbon in particular, but without compromising some of the really core things that have kept our agenda strong, which is to not purely focus on the operational. I mean, those of you who know us know that actually our reputation is more for our educational work on sustainability than our operational work. And we can't afford to compromise that, because that speaks to the core drivers and the core value chain we've established within the university. So where are we going right now in trying to develop our approach? Just to sort of quickly put this slide in front of you, and obviously we could come back to it in the Q&A if we need to, but our new ambitions as we develop them, and we're recruiting a carbon and environmental management post at the moment, so this person is going to come in with the thrill of this job on their hands to actually develop a new carbon strategy to take us through for at least 2030. And try and set the ambition much higher. Obviously, we're already doing a bit to up our renewables to meet the current CMP goal, and we've managed to do some work for this year that overshoots that. But we need a much stronger efficiency drive on how we work the infrastructure, and we need to digitize that badly. We're doing some quite intensive work in our university on learning technology and dashboarding that should help us if we can also apply that to some of the key operational domains. And there's a sort of a big piece about making the financial case for the next 3-year budget allocation on infrastructure around this, and linking that to the core business driver of the technological learning enhancement work that we are having to do in order to keep curriculum quality up. And also, like I mentioned, we need to engage our student leaders. The picture that we have at the top in this slide is of our students being on the youth panel at the launch of Gloucestershire's climate strategy recently. And our student green team leader on the right there has been asked to go and deliver talks and do training for the youth climate panel, and our students are on that. There's a really important catalytical piece there for us about how we're working with our partners in the region on this, and that includes businesses and also, as John pointed out, unusual suspects. One of our key partners at the moment is the Cathedral, who have a brilliant initiative of their own and a massive solar array and huge plans for the next few years to tackle sustainability and to work with partners like ourselves on it. So there are a range of different groups and players and stakeholders who we are trying to bring more and more into the urgency of this agenda. And that includes as well, obviously, our governing body. They are becoming more and more with us and sort of feisty about seeking to work with us to drive this agenda forward and make sure that we resolve critical issues like how long our decision-making horizons are in the university. Again, a systemic problem that we really want to address through the critical issue of carbon. And again, communicating with staff and working with our staff so that they can see exactly what place they can have and what part they can play in this, as well as being out on the streets. So just to sort of summarize, I think one of the topics that we were asked to think about for the webinar, which maybe we can talk about together, is about how the leadership of the agenda is shifting. And for us in the university, certainly just in the last 6 weeks, I can see a massive game-changing conversation coming from the student energy. Our student green team have really found their feet at the moment and have hit the decks running with the climate action. And you know, I put a picture of their the recent climate action in Cheltenham up there, and put 3 quotes up just to sort of exemplify what I think are the brilliance pieces of the student energy, certainly for us, and maybe it's the same for you. I mean, the top quote for me speaks to the urgency with which our students are bringing the agenda forward. And there's an honesty and a truth value there that I think everybody in the university, from SMT down, is finding refreshing, and that cuts through some of the other issues to really get to the chase of some of the future-proofing agendas that are critical here. And the second quote for me just sums up the inspiration that our youth voice has about the optimism of the will that they're expressing about tackling this. And I love that climate take-back study of interfaces that showed how strong the vision is for tackling this agenda, despite what might seem as insurmountable odds. And then at the bottom, for me, is a really important one, where we remind ourselves that although carbon is critical, it is a crisis-based agenda at the moment, and we've got to act, and we've got to act faster, deeper. We've got to do what John likes to call moonshot thinking. But underneath all of that, we can't afford to let it become faddish, and also let the agenda for whole systemic change become compromised by what can be perceived as a one-pointed, single issue operational matter. You know, our university is a great example of someone that has actually platformed its sustainability agenda on a learning and educational drive. And that bigger agenda of embedding sustainability across curriculum in a very dynamic way, not just a content way, is the expertise zone that we need to maintain. And just, you know, if we let carbon literacy fall into a wrongful balance with that agenda, then we will actually lose our game, and we will lose the potential for that big picture systemic response, which happens with our stakeholders and which gets the catalytic effect and the speed up that we want. So really, that was me just to share with you some of our dilemmas, some of our thoughts, and some of our wishes, but to be at the crossroads with you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to both of you on that. It's really useful to hear what everybody is doing. We are going to pass over to Fiona to talk about what the EAUC are doing to help in this space. And yeah, Fiona.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Alex, and thanks, John. I'm just giving an overview of what EAUC are doing in this space. So many of you will know that we declared a climate emergency back in May, and from that we're really galvanising action to support the sector in this journey. As Alex says, you know, lots of institutions are grappling with the various issues that this presents, and we're here to try and support the sector in trying to find the solutions and the answers, but also on a sector-wide level. So to make sure that, you know, as a sector, both universities and colleges are measuring, reporting in similar ways that is comparable. But obviously all institutions have to take their own path and take their own journey in how they're going to do this. So we have a sustainability commitments page on our website. This includes whether institutions have declared a climate emergency or not. We don't feel that that's particularly necessarily important, as Alex says, each institution has to take their own path, and for some institutions that works for them, others it doesn't. What's more important for us is the targets that institutions have set and what policies they have in place. So we're constantly updating that as institutions are setting their targets and have new policies in place. So that's a good starting point for institutions to look at. And following that, we set up a think tank for the sector. So we had a think tank event back in July, supported by Nottingham-Trent University. And from that, we've really tried to gain the various issues, the various support that's needed, signposting into the resources that are already out there and good examples of good practice. And from that, we've developed the climate emergency framework. And that's looking at all levels. So that's looking at the senior management, the leadership, the governors. We have a governor's guide out as well, which we've done with Advanced HE and Universities UK. Looking at partnerships and communities. So again, looking at the community and the place that institutions have within their local community. As Alex was saying, like here in Gloucestershire, working with the cathedral, but also working on your local locality, working with the council, working with other public sector organisations, as well as the commercial organisations in your community. We also then have an estates and operations aspect, and a teaching and research aspect for the think tank as well. And following from that, the whole scope 3, as Alex says, is you know, how do we tackle this? I'm leading on various working groups for scope 3. We're looking at the higher impact areas. So we're developing a travel, staff travel tool with the Roundtable of Sustainable Academic that's based in the University of Edinburgh, and we're hoping to trial that with Leeds, Manchester and Oxford in the coming months, and then hopefully we'll roll that out, so a sector-wide response for that. We're also looking at IT, but that's very early days. We're working with JISC on that. We are working on a food element with TUCO, which is a catering consortia, and there was a great new tool that TUCO had just released, which is open to all institutions, and you can measure your specific menus or specific items, and that provides you with GHG emissions for that. And also working with the energy consortia in construction waste, and looking for various research the institutions are doing. So we know that there's some great research coming out of Leeds and Bath on this at the moment. And following all from this, we still felt that we need a proper sector-wide agreement. We're lacking government drivers, we're lacking any push and clear direction from the regulation bodies, specifically in England. Scotland have far stronger drivers, but we need a sector-wide response to the climate crisis. So we are setting up a climate commission for UK higher and further education leaders. This is in partnership with Association of Colleges, Guild HE and Universities UK. And we have a launch event on the 13th of November. All vice-chancellors and principals in institutions across the UK have been invited to become part of the council that will feed into this commission. And we will very much link in with the think tank and the sustainability practitioners throughout the year. It's a year-long commission with a very clear and action-driven outcomes and deliverables. And we will report to the COP26, which is being hosted by Glasgow in December 2020. So that's what we're doing on the UK level, but we also are active on the global level. So we work with the United Nations Environment. We have a global climate letter. And again, we are asking for institutions on a global level to support this. And then we will be presenting that at COP25 in Chile, and again to the COP26 in Glasgow. And we also run the Sustainability Leadership Scorecard, which is in partnership with AUD, and that really provides a framework for institutions to see where they are, how they can map where the gaps are, and it's a real continual improvement tool. And more institutions are really using that and helping to engage across the institution. And it can be really a useful communication tool as well, to report back to the staff and the students within the institution in terms of what you're doing in all areas across the institution. We are also ensuring that within the Climate Commission, students and the youth voice is very much at the heart of the commission. So again, as Alex was saying, really galvanising on that energy, passion and drive for action to make sure that the student voice is part of that. In just terms of the, when Alex was talking about offsetting, I'm also in early talks with the Energy Consortia to develop a sector-wide specific offsetting programme. It's very early days at the moment, but if anyone is interested in wanting to help create what this could look at, then just please contact me. I'll leave it there, but so we can have plenty of time for Q&A for this. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Fiona and John, Alex. There's certainly a lot going on, so I think everyone's acting a little bit like the house is on fire, and everyone's taking a corner to try and put that out. Just while we're waiting, I know that both of, well, actually all three of your presentations touched a little bit on collaboration. There's some very interesting collaborations. Certainly Interface are doing some very interesting collaborations of people you wouldn't necessarily have thought of. I mean, obviously you in a slightly different industry with carpets than with everybody else. I wonder if each of, or Alex, if you could just outline quickly who you think might be maybe some unusual or community collaborations. I know you mentioned the cathedral kind of in the Gloucestershire area.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can just say a small amount more on that. Gloucester Cathedral have had, and I've been aware of this for a while, they are, I think, the oldest, either the oldest religious building in Europe or the world to have put a solar array on their roof. And it's incredible. It's just a wonderful thing, visually as well as obviously technically, the feat of having done that on this historic cathedral. And they did that under the auspices of a project initiative called Project Pilgrim, where they were trying to tackle some really critical systemic viability issues for a religious building and a religious institution trying to find its way in the modern world. And with issues like obviously a declining aging population, which we all know is pretty common in a lot of Christian communities, although not all. And in this case, being in a certain part, right in fair and square in the centre of Gloucester, and in a place where there are lots of different social and community enclaves around them that have got more and less disadvantaged experiences of life, and the cathedral wanting to actually make their dwelling place a sort of public square and a community base in which they can draw more people in and engage better with different and more diverse groups in the community, and to really hit, that's what we all look at as a social sustainability button, but at the same time as actually being a lot more responsible about their operational practice. So their Project Pilgrim Wave 1 has happened over the last couple of years and resulted in these massive panels on the roof, some really brilliant activities, and in us and them linking up over a really common shared sense of purpose as two individual organisations who are also deeply committed in our region. Our university is the main university known as the HE provider, although we now have Royal Agricultural University with us in Gloucestershire as two HE providers. But this is in a region where we're not known for having a university presence. So the whole mission and purpose bit for us about being a positive force in the region is really important. And of course, that's a shared platform that we have with the cathedral. And although we are working with businesses on the carbon agenda and all sorts of other sustainability R&D agendas, actually, in terms of our way of being invested in the region, we have a real similarity with the cathedral in that, unlike businesses, we're never going to relocate. We're always going to be there. We're always going to stay there. We're going to want to be there for Gloucestershire. So it's that collaboration platform between us and the wish for a really systemic triple bottom line approach that has actually brought us together. We started with some experimenting in collaboration in a small scale last year. through doing a student and community action challenges event, which is scaling up this year, and it's part of our student and community engagement program through the RCE. But as they now get in and they're bidding for Project Pilgrim Phase 2 and much bigger sums of money, we're now developing some much more strategic plans about how can we tackle some really big impact areas. And obviously we'll be looking at things like shared posts and going for funding together and setting local projects that are really bringing a very rich group of stakeholders together. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's the sort of work we're doing. I would also say that one of our equally interesting partners are sitting alongside me to the left, and that has been, I don't know if John wants to say anything about that, but for us certainly that has been another really interesting meeting point with an organisation that has the same sense of strategic mission and purpose, and despite the differences of sector and size, we're getting into some really interesting, fruitful collaboration spaces.
Yeah, I think it was interesting kind of outreach. I think we learn a lot from kind of working with you and kind of your ambition and how you're approaching it in your sector. If we can help support through what we're making, and if we can help on whether it's on the academic or on the operational side, spark some discussion or spark some interest, I'm more than happy to do so. And I think if you can broaden your horizons to explore some of those more unusual connections, it's a really powerful thing. And I think another link between us is we both have the ability to convene, but we probably usually convene slightly different audiences. So that's another real plus point.
Yeah.
I have a quick question here from Simon Goldsmith. Alex, you mentioned that you haven't or won't soon be declaring a climate emergency. Do you think declaring one would have helped accelerate your support? Do you think your existing strategy stroke plan will be enough to move you towards a net zero target? And have you set a net zero target yet?
So, okay, let me try and reverse backwards, and maybe Claire, you can remind me if I missed the bit.
Okay.
It was my second coffee this morning, so the memory retention might be a little bit rubbish. So have we set one yet? No. So where we are in terms of the carbon strategy and plan is we've got a current live carbon plan, which was actually only written in 2017, and we already feel it's out of date because its 3 goals were: 1, to increase our renewables, and we've done that and now got a set of renewable initiatives in place for this current year, which is going to take us to double that target. It was only a modest target, but we've done that bit. And then we wanted to hold steady on having achieved our hitting over 40% on scope 1 and 2 by 2020. We wanted to hold that position, knowing that we were now we'd just done a massive lot of campus and infrastructural spend with 2 major developments. And the budgets were then going to be tight for a couple of years while we went into this very difficult couple of years in the sector, where recruitment is tough and obviously Brexit's around and all sorts of strange and peculiar things are hitting us in a perfect storm in the sector. So we kind of wanted to have a quite modest strategy for a few years just to hold steady. And then the third goal that we had was just about our reporting and reporting on relatives as well as totals, which we're doing. But so that's our current plan, and that's already out of date. We'd always been looking at the fact that our carbon strategy, the 10-year one that we wrote in 2010, was coming up in 2020. And of course, what's happened during the course of this year and even in the last few months is that the wave of student action and staff and citizen action is now, I think, it's really bringing a brilliant level of momentum and clarity to an agenda that would have been, it would have carried on making its journey through the institution, because sustainability is well held in our institution. But I think given how many calls there are in the institutional purse at the moment, and some of those calls are equally urgent and life critical, like student mental health, for instance. There's a real genuine tussle about questions of what is urgency at the moment and why. But I think the energy around the carbon conversation is great, because it is just adding a bit of oomph and bolstering to that. And for me, I think it's the energy of the stakeholder voices, particularly the student voice, that is more important to my institution than declaring. I don't actually, and this is a personal view, I don't think that in our organisation, a declaration would necessarily make a critical difference. I think what is important is the communication of what is going on, what the actions are, the fact that the Vice-Chancellor is meeting with students, the fact that there will be a new strategy coming, the fact that we're hitting our targets, and what people can do to help us on the journey. That's actually more important. And I think this is always the case with sustainability and systemic change. You got to ask yourself, what does good look like in your own institution? And that's always got a lot to do with circumstance, moment, and also personality. Every institution's got a character, as well as characters at the top table and everywhere. And you have to go with the grain of your institution. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. So for us, like I say, we live in quaint Cheltenham in rural Gloucestershire, and that gives us certain particular challenges, like we're not in a city, we're in a place where public transport infrastructure is sadly wanting. And also, you know, we're in a town like Cheltenham where people out on the street, that's quite a thing, you know. So, you know, right sizing and right attituding, if that's a word, your approach is critical, I would say. Has that answered the questions, do you think?
Yeah, I think that the only part that you haven't touched on is, have you set a net zero target?
No, so sorry, yes, the thread I didn't catch up was that we're just about to set a new carbon strategy, and then that will force us into a new carbon plan, because we've kind of ticked what we wanted to on the one we didn't write very long ago. So that's the next task for like the next 6 months, really.
Fantastic, great. So another question, this one's for John, also from Simon Goldsmith, University of Greenwich. As someone working on but outside the HE sector, what do you think the top suggestions for developing and getting leadership for a low net zero carbon would be that you have learned from Interface as a non-HE leader?
I think for me, kind of democratizing that debate. So you're kind of bringing together your operations and your academics. And one area that I think we haven't focused enough on is that issue of embodied carbon. So that the fact that whatever materials are used to construct a campus, we've always focused on the very important operational aspects of energy and energy production, which is super important. And I don't want to push away from that, but for every material that's there's a carbon story behind it. And I think that's an area that has not been looked at. It's one that the built environment is just waking up to. And I think within the higher education and further education sector, it will be one important one too. But the most exciting thing about this sector is some of the answers, some of the research, some of the radical thinking can come from here. So I'm quite excited on that side. And then on a separate note, finding a way to channel that passion within your student and your employees and that pressure, and help that push on making the right choices, developing the right strategy. This idea that this issue does get democratized is something I think can happen a lot faster in this sector than it would in a traditional business.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, I think, because, you know, if we remind ourselves, universities are actually structured and founded on a set of democratic principles. It makes life hard sometimes because you've got fiefdoms of resource holding departments and services that control their own game. But actually, if you look at developing a change strategy that calls on that in terms of how you take responsibility, that is quite interesting, because democratic decision making by the body of the university community is one of the weird ways in which we structure our university organisations.
Like a kind of fun way to do it is if you take the tenets of Extinction Rebellion and if you kind of democratise that issue of procurement in universities and said, tell the truth. That's the first thing, you know, just getting more awareness. I mean, procurement, to be honest, is not always the most sexy of topics. I don't say that to certain chartered practices, but that reality of being transparent and sharing that, you know, a lot of universities and further education colleges do a lot of great work on procurement. They are asking those questions, kind of sharing the positive stories that you can see is another thing that I think is something that can be done well in this sector and that will also inspire other sectors too.
Yeah, I think that's right.
The work of the EAUC, just looking through Fiona's list there, what's coming together, it's very exciting, and I think there's a lot of other sectors that will look into that and learn from that. You guys will have a huge ripple effect with the work that you're doing.
It's a great point, John, actually, to bring in the procurement and ask that question of, oh, but is it sexy? Because actually we did a 2-year procurement project and I found myself completely converted to how sexy procurement actually is. But I think one of the interesting things that we've found as a tale of the procurement work that we've done is that we can use the thread of, I mean, we've called it power of the purse in terms of our student facing and staff facing comms that have come from our procurement refresh initiative. But what we're finding now is that in terms of comms, we can spin that power of the purse for good motif in a quite clever way in order to speak to core student concerns about the value for money they're getting, the way that they are handling the difficulties of finance and being a poor student. And that's really speaking to our students. They're really latching onto that and seeing that, and then seeing the links across to divestment and the investment part of life, and really starting to understand how they can effect change through really getting a window on procurement and how important that is and where the business to business tail effects of that are.
And on another issue, I think even with your employee side, just realising, you know, the university's pension scheme's done a lot of great work on responsible investment for 15 plus years. And just having that transparency to celebrate being that this sector has stormed on in relation to that. It's not perfect. There's a lot of other issues there, but celebrating that and then finding a way to share that with the employees as a positive story of empowerment.
That's so true. So true. It would be really interesting. I don't know if anybody who's in the room would like to share a bit about how they are tackling this and what they are up against. I mean, I know I would be really interested to just hear a bit more from anybody in the room. You know, I know Simon's there and a couple of other people I know.
I mean, on the note, I think one thing that we find in the business community is we often have, we don't really publicise these on webinars, but sessions where on a round table, we just highlight the barriers that we're facing. Often it becomes a bit like a therapy session, but it can be just helpful to, and I think some of these are already formed in some of the stuff that Fiona is saying, but also what I see within the EAUC in terms of the collaboration, being able to have the safe space to share where it's not working, where the challenges lie, and to share ideas about what could be tried and what would be suitable for different kinds of establishments in different localities.
Yeah, that's a really, in terms of my therapy, you know, confession moment, it would be that I still haven't, I don't think in our university we've found a sort of quick and easy tool or approach to life cycle costing that with a very devolved procurement function can be really easily picked up by ordinary people who are making decisions and applied at a lot of different scales. And my goodness, if anybody's got that, it'd be great to know, or if anybody's got a good approach that they've developed. I know that's one of our biggest headaches in getting more mature decision making on carbon and the range of agendas.
Just on that, we're working with various institutions that are looking at the life cycle costing, specifically St Andrews, for example, Morris. So they're at the very early stages of sort of trialing that out, and then we hope to then share that with the sector in terms of hopefully rolling it out further wider.
Is there anybody out there in the group who's...
I was going to say, I don't know if Antonia Lindsay from UCEM, she said she doesn't have a microphone, but just to let you know that they are starting the conversation about a climate action plan and the option to declare a climate emergency today. Their institutional working group, so that's a meeting today, but said it's very helpful to hear what others have been doing and the challenges to try and work around from the start. So I don't know if anybody else has got any thing to share in terms of the challenges around declaring a climate emergency for those of you who maybe have or have maybe decided not to.
I don't know if Simon, who asked the question, I don't know if you want to share what's going on at Greenwich. I'd be really interested to know actually whether this is what you've done at Greenwich and how that's gone.
Simon, I'm not sure if you've got a microphone, but he has replied, we will be proposing to the VC that we declare in part. This will enable us to have a clear strategy that is funded to deliver against. We're also seeking that if we do declare a climate emergency, then we will develop net zero carbon plan that we could then connect up a wider sustainability strategy to. David Chapman from Warwick. The University of Warwick has declared and split our targets scope 1 and 2 by 2030 and scope 3 by 2050. I think scope 3 and what you mentioned, John, about embodied carbon is probably the next challenge for quite a lot of institutions now.
And we are finding quite a lot of institutions are having this kind of two-tiered target in terms of sort of an earlier target for scope 1 and 2, and then a more longer term one for scope 3, just to recognise all the complexities in that. Yeah. And I think going back to the sort of the making procurement sexy elements with all the scope 3 work that we're doing is really engaging your suppliers. So, you know, and the other businesses that you work with. So I think, you know, working with leaders such as Interface and telling that story to people. So, you know, again, it's sort of how do you make a carpet sexy? But then if you start telling them all about the fishermen's and the nets in the Philippines and Cameroon, then it's a really engaging story that you can engage your sort of staff, students, community about. We're working very closely with a lot of the purchasing consortia on all of the Scope 3 work and the Higher Education Procurement Academy as well. So we are trying to sort of really work with the procurement people on it to make it as easy as possible for procurement people to take this on and to include those sort of decision making.
That's going to be a really important piece. I mean, in terms of internal obstacles, I think the lack of a scope 3 methodology that is shared and known in the sector, it is a massive issue, because the more this agenda, I'm finding, the more this agenda becomes live within the public space, all citizens at all levels, when you meet them as individual professionals and your colleagues, they are more sophisticated in their understanding of your agenda, but that means they can ask you the pokier questions like this. So like, well, this is all very well, but I know, isn't there an issue with measuring this? And of course, we're saying, yes, sadly, there is. So the quicker, and I agree, I think that's quite right, Fiona. When I was looking around, I can see how many of the plans are staged, and I'm pretty darn sure that's exactly where we will end up. We'll end up with a more immediate scope 1 and 2 target for 2030, and then scope 3 will be developmental work that will follow along. But of course, the quicker you can build some confidence and literacy as you go about the scope 1 and 2 work, then you can catalyze and get quicker. You know, when we're talking about sailing and sailing type metaphors, I always have a long running argument with my VC about his favorite chosen metaphor is always, how can we make the boat go faster? And I always stand there and go, how can we become better sailors? And then we have a nice little metaphorical argument about the pros and cons of these strategies for change and for getting where we want to get to. But yeah, I think that those sort of headache issues that hold the progress back, if we can get something good happening on those, it will really help us.
I think people understand that scope 3 is a real challenge, whether you're working in the education sector or working as a business, as a manufacturer, whatever you do. And but I think there's some great work that's happening in terms of people having a two-tiered approach makes a lot of sense. And also working together to work out how we can move quickly or sail better for the scope 1 and 2, but how that carries over to the scope 3 as well. So it's going to be a challenge that's not going to be going anywhere for a while, but I feel optimistic that there's the right people and the right talent to make an easier challenge.
So a huge thank you to all of you for your time and for what we it's been really interesting, and hopefully some food for thought for everyone.